Is the recording on? All right, perfect. All right, good day, everyone, and welcome. I am Nicole Jackson, Director of Education with Center for Engagement, Environmental Justice, and Health, better known as CEEJH. It is my honor to welcome you all here today to view our Fellows Final Assignment Showcase. Launched in 2023, this fellowship program is a virtual program that educates individuals on environmental and climate justice, empowering fellows with ties to frontline communities to address local challenges. Fellows progress through an immersive 10 to 13 module curriculum, culminating in a capstone or technical assistance project. Having been a fellow and senior fellow in this program, I am proud to have redesigned the program this year to become more practical and global oriented. We centered everything on real world applications through our empowerment science frameworks, which include community-based participatory research, citizen science, and the collaborative problem solving model. Fellows engage with assignments rooted in actual case studies tailored to their community specific needs. This philosophy helped us culminate in the projects that you're going to hear about today, and a significant shift from previous years. We allowed fellows to design and proactively develop their own initiatives, which moved beyond traditional capstone projects. They also gained hands-on experience working either with CEEJH staff, CEEJH partners on technical projects from policy analysis to air quality monitoring. This practice-based model helped us on a good scale to be able to expand our fellowship across a global network this year. And we were thrilled to welcome a diverse range of fellows in this cohort from 16 different countries. So not only were we an ethically, an ethnically and gender diverse cohort, but we were also a geographically diverse cohort this year. So we found that by expanding the fellowship, it helped us to enrich our discussions and broaden our understanding of the climate challenges that are not only different, but how we are also interconnected globally. So today, we are going to hear from three fellows, Sabrina, who is from UK, Tarshire, who's in Rhode Island, and Cherrelle, who is in Texas. I'm going to ask everyone to please keep your questions until the end, or you can put your questions in the Q&A or chat box, and we will have Q&A session at the end after each fellow has presented. Right now, I'm going to introduce a brief bio for each fellow, and then we're going to start the presentations with Sabrina. So Sabrina Shadie is a consultant specializing in ethics, equity, and sustainable development. With over 25 years of experience across public, private, and nonprofit sectors, she helps organize, implement effective diversity, social inclusion, and ethical framework strategies. An accomplished educator and coach, Sabrina has developed accredited leadership programs and advised national entities, including universities, to foster more equitable and sustainable outcomes. She is a highly skilled advocate, driving positive change at the intersection of people and planet. Then we'll hear from Tarshire Battle. Tarshire is a social entrepreneur and the founder of Roots to Empower, and an organization dedicated to elevating marginalized communities through education, empowerment, and sustainability. Drawing over a decade of experience as a mental health counselor and advocate, she leads high-impact initiatives in workforce development, climate justice, and civic engagement. Tashire's work, which includes youth STEM programs and community garden, uses trauma-informed and holistic approach to create equitable system change. She is also a published author and a powerful voice for grassroots innovation. And last but not least, we have Cherrelle Duncan, who is a dedicated public servant and Director of Community Engagement for Link Houston, where she leads efforts to ensure equitable and reliable transportation access. Her extensive career includes serving as Chief of Staff for Houston City Council, where she coordinated pandemic relief and tackled issues of housing and resiliency. A proven leader, Cherrelle has successfully raised millions for nonprofit initiatives. Her expertise is nationally recognized, evidenced by her recent appointment by the Biden administration to the EPA's National Advisory Committee. We have such great fellows for you guys to hear from today. So without further ado, we're going to get started with our first fellow.
Okay, can everyone see what I'm sharing? Is that cool? So I'm not going to do a big introduction because I got a great introduction already from Nicole. Suffice to say that the work that I do is really based on my experience as an educator in the public sector space for nearly 15 years. And the model that we use for all of our content development for our community is really founded in this 7-pillar model, which talks about basically all the steps to building ethical and equitable ecosystems to make sure decision making really meets the needs of whoever the client base or service user base is. Our issue really came from the work we do with small businesses and the work we do in the community as trustees of charities. We realise that the public services in the UK are really failing. The governance is almost non-existent in a lot of places, and the voice of people, everyday people, is there's no mechanisms to really feed that up the line. Our local council actually went bankrupt in the last 10 years and hasn't really recovered since. So communities don't have mechanisms to enable their voices. This causes inconsistent governance, which means public sector spaces don't have people on the ground feeding in. Decisions are made through people who aren't probably part of the community, which means it's often not fit for purpose. And that leads to the poor representation that we're seeing. So not just in terms of what we're talking about today, which is the climate justice part, but actually services in general are not fit for purpose and don't have representation. So the environmental damage actually ends up being an ongoing problem because it's never the first problem. It's always, food, education, and health, and then the environment. So actually the environmental damage is so significant now that it's impacting the health and the other areas and needing to be done, needs to be resolved in a much more urgent, because it's been left for so many years. And that's causing bigger problems, especially where we live in a semi-rural location. We are working with lots of organisations to build some mechanisms and educate people in how to be involved in their governance in their local area to help address a lot of these issues. And what the first thing we did was to gather all of the research that had already been done by lots of organisations, including universities, about the gaps and the injustices and what the recommendations were. So we pulled together a report called Forging Pathways for Success, which was literally a literature review of 10 other research pieces, which all had very similar and overlapping recommendations, culminating in the need for improved representation, equitable decision making, and equality data reporting. If you want to look at our report, you can do the QR code and that'll take you to a link. We understood from all of this academic research that the same problems were being experienced over and over again in all of these different fields, whether it was in healthcare, in business, or in environmental challenges. So actually the recommendations were the same across the board. From that, we decided to put together a conference, which was really aimed at engaging everyday people to look at what opportunities were available to them in the governance space where they live. So very much about local empowerment, very much about engaging stakeholders and people getting involved in a space that means something to them. Particularly looking at professionals and small business, because that's where we run a business network, my husband and I, and supporting businesses from diverse backgrounds to be more involved in governance will help with the representation, but also helps build those small businesses in terms of their reputation and their understanding of the communities they serve. So our mission was really about building those mechanisms for addressing inequalities in society by connecting communities and values-led businesses, creating opportunities for ethical and sustainable collaborations. We've worked with lots of collaborative projects that are helped with what we call NEAT in the UK, so it's not in education, employment or training, and helping those groups into spaces like STEM. So that's one of the areas that we kind of specialise in. Using the framework that was at the beginning, one of our trademark frameworks, the 7 pillars, where we talk about how do we build on what we already have in place and really work to collaborate to make it better and bigger. So one of the things we've done is provide CPD certification, which gives practical learning for our participants so that they can really evidence their knowledge and skills to go forward in the governance space to move the conversations around how services are delivered for the community, making sure that things are evidence-based, making sure that we showcase the high value of the work that local engagement actually produces, and being able to build that community strength by linking public services, third sector voluntary services, and local small businesses to provide a united front when we're engaging with authority figures and bigger corporations who maybe are not looking after our spaces very well. Our implementation plan really started with the literature research piece, and then moved on to engaging our stakeholders and talking to the communities that we're already part of to see what they felt would help them. A lot of people from diverse communities, particularly from Caribbean communities in the UK, do not always feel confident to step into places of decision making and leadership and the very authoritarian nature of UK local authorities. So one of the things that we wanted to do was really give them the skills and the confidence and the support package behind them to enable them to step forward into those spaces, which is why we developed the conference and looked to work with lots of different partners, including a local university, to host that event. Our conference is going to be on the 21st of November. We have 80 participants, or 80 sets of tickets plus online tickets available. My academy will be CPD certifying this program for people, so they'll get 6 hour or 6 points, CPD points for attendance. We're providing lunch, we're providing a wellbeing room, we're providing live music. So we've tried to make it really inclusive and really culturally connected to the community, and we're running it in a place where I grew up. So it's very local to me, and I know our speakers are from local places, including a local councillor and NHS non-executive director and things like that. After we've run the program, we're going to be putting together an impact report where we gather the information from all of our participants and speakers, all of our suppliers who are also local people, to really identify how valuable this work is so that we can take it on the roadshow and actually make it an ongoing thing, not just for this event, but something that we would run up and down the UK throughout the year at different local events, working with our network that's already in place as part of our business network, and helping our members all around the country run similar events in their local space around the issues that their communities are facing environmentally and socially, but with our national template and with our national CPD certification and with support from our national partners as well. In terms of our impact, we are expecting to see big impact on local business by supporting small businesses with the knowledge and networks and leadership pathways to help influence decision making, driving that ethical growth that we keep talking about to provide for that, for the innovation, but also for that sustainable and environmental long-term strategy. Because in the UK, small businesses like ours actually make up about 90% of the economy. So it's really important that we engage small business in the sustainability, but they don't have to do reporting at the moment. So there's a big gap in understanding for small businesses of what's required of them. The impact on community is really about empowering those underrepresented voices. Governance is very monoculture in the UK, and we need to really address that to make the changes that are required. In our local government, which is what started this program for us, we don't have any diversity in the decision-making teams. Frontline staff look more diverse, but actually decision makers higher up, there's literally zero diversity. They are all men of a certain age and from the dominant culture. And then in terms of the impact on environment, the challenge that I've found when we were trying to work in the environmental space around some of the problems that we're facing as a local community, was that actually there's no significant mechanisms to have the conversation that needs to be had. So looking at ethical leadership and inclusive governance is actually the way that we can promote sustainable decision making that prioritizes environmental responsibility alongside the social and economic equity, which currently doesn't happen. So in conclusion, I know I've run through it really fast, but every time I've delivered this, I did not keep to the 10 minutes. So I'm trying to make sure that I do, and I give you guys space for questions. So we have a call for action, and really the conference is about how do we implement an initiative that will transform leadership by embedding equity and ethics as well as representation at the heart of decision making. Because by empowering diverse voices in governance, we hope that our project will directly address the systemic inequalities, strengthening community resilience, and promoting ethical leadership that prioritizes both social and environmental responsibility. Through these inclusive pathways and collaborative learning, the conference supports the future where governance reflects the communities it serves and protects the planet we all share. You can obviously join our conference. We have an online live stream if anybody's interested by scanning the QR code. And you can grab my contact details here if you are interested to do so. I suppose the point for me was that unraveling so many of the challenges of the intersectional inequalities that we are facing as a community, every route I looked at came back to the fact that decision makers don't look like the people who need to, who are receiving end of whatever the service was. So my project was really about how do we change that? And until the people, the service users and the stakeholders are getting to make the decisions that affect their lives, we will not see good outcomes, not for the environment, not for our living spaces. I live in a semi-rural community, which floods because they've built on all the floodplains and, so many challenges to the waterways. And it's generally the community is ignored when they try to push back. So by setting them into governance roles where they have title and they have the power, it's harder to ignore them. And that's why we did this project. I hope that makes sense. And obviously I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much, Sabrina. We're going to save questions until after everyone has presented, but do feel free to put the link to your conference in the chat. So now we're going to move on to Tarshire.
Okay, let me share my screen. Where's my PowerPoint? Give me 1 second. Okay, you can see that?
Yes.
Okay. Oh, it's not over yet. Let me go back to the first slide. Okay, hi, good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, wherever you are. My name is Tarshire Battle, and I'm the founder of Roots to Empower. Nicole already introduced me and gave me a lovely introduction, so I'm just gonna jump right into the presentation. I'm doing my presentation on the mangrove restoration in Dayak land in Indonesia. Let me just move that out the way. I can't see myself. Oh my God. Technology. Oh my God. I think I lost the presentation. Okay. So the Dayak are primarily concentrated in Indonesia, in Borneo. I'm hoping I'm saying that right. But also live in the Sarawak and Sabah of Malaysia and parts of Brunei. There are dozens of sub groups that include the Ibn, the Kayan, the Kenya, Nagaju, and Bidayu, each with their own dialects and cultural practices. And this particular project, the reason why I chose it is because a lot of Indigenous folks, no matter where they are in the world, also face a lot of environmental injustice as well as land disposition. And so this this case kind of resonated with me when I chose it. So land rights remain central in the DIAC for the DIAC leaders and activists there. Campaigns against corporate and state encroachment on ancestral lands continue to happen. So this article that you've seen on your right-hand side was from last year, which still talks about all of these disputes, land disputes that are going on of people, Indigenous folks just being uprooted from their spaces. The Dyke are increasingly recognized as key stewards to the Bonero rainforest, which we're going to talk about the mangroves, playing a vital role in biodiversity and conservation. So as Indigenous folks, they have this knowledge and they are the stewards of the land. So they kind of know the land best and how to best take care of it. So the mangrove ecosystems in Indonesia provide essential ecological and social functions. They protect shorelines from erosion, buffer communities against climate impacts, and store significant amounts of blue carbon and sustain livelihoods through fishery and biodiversity. Yet the ecosystem is going through changes. There's a lot of land degradation because of logging, extensive aquaculture expansions, and large-scale industrial development. At the same time, the Dayak people and which are indigenous forest stewards, have faced systemic exclusion from land rights, which is what I talked about earlier, diminishing their ability to protect and manage their ancestral properties. So if you have no say in any expansion or all that what's going on the land, you're going to see this injustice and as well as environmental impacts, like all of this deforestation that we're seeing right now on this screen. This project will integrate ecological restoration with Indigenous land justice over the next 3 years. So the goal of this project is to restore 1,500 hectares of mangroves, to secure land rights for 10 Dayak villages, to create 300 jobs and and train 500 community members around ecological practices such as land fisheries, small businesses, as well as growing mangrove trees to be implanted to kind of revive the waters, and to establish 5 green entrepreneurship enterprises and align all of these practices with Indonesia climate strategies that's out there. This initiative will support sustainable livelihoods, including silvo fisheries, which is the entrepreneurship part, honey production, and ecotourism. I had a chance to go to Sri Lanka and visit their forest, and they're using that space as a learning space, kind of, and you know, we were there as tourists touring that land. This space could also be used for ecotourism to kind of revive and generate revenue to support these projects. Community-led enterprises ensure that restoration is tied to long-term economic security. The initiative also aligns with Indonesia's National Mangrove Ecosystem Management Strategy, which is out, the National Determinant Contributions under the Paris Agreement, and it affirms the principles of United Nations Declaration and Rights of Indigenous People. The first step of the plan is to get community engagement. A lot of times, as all of us know, where a lot of people are kept out of conversations, including Indigenous folks. And so getting them involved in the conversation will help drive this project. So participatory planning will involve the Dayak villages and community. The second phase will involve restoration and implementation within community involvement around developing community nurseries that will establish and propagate diverse mangrove species. And this also will create jobs to ensure supplies for planting efforts. This will provide a livelihood integration. So we're going to be training and we'll be providing training on silvo fisheries, which is another way to develop entrepreneurship and for people to have sustainable careers by combining aquaculture, honey production, as well as cooperative development, and then governance and advocacy. So negotiating policies and engagement between a diet council and the local government around this project and also around land acquisition. So the project will amplify DIAC leadership through cultural storytelling. As you know, storytelling is very important when we're talking about environmental justice. So also hearing those stories from Indigenous folks to kind of connect the dots to what they're experiencing is very important. So there will be workshops around what that is, storytelling to help guide guide them along the way to produce visual campaigns that highlight Indigenous ecological stewardship. And like I said, the timeline is a 3-year project. So this is timeline outlines. Again, participatory mapping with the community involvement. Just as I said, I've already went over this in the other slide, but this just is the timeline and you can see it in bullet points. The project will be evaluated through combination of quantitative targets as well as qualitative assessments, ensuring that both ecological achievements and social justice outcomes are fully measured. So again, the storytelling element as well as capturing the numbers, the outcomes. So again, restoring 1,500 hectares of degraded mangrove ecosystems will be measured, monitoring progress with satellite imagery and GIS mapping, ground surveys, and then tracking biodiversity recovery through annual surveys of the biodiversity within that water space, mangrove, mud crabs, fish, migratory birds, etc. And the social outcomes will achieve through legal recognition of customary land rights for at least 10 Dayak villages, creating jobs through restoration brigades and cooperatives and ecotourism, providing training for community members in ecological restoration, governance, and sustainable livelihoods. And that is it for me. Thank you.
Thank you so much to share. And now we'll hear from Cherrelle.
So let's get started. So my name is Cherrelle Duncan, and I'm here to present about mobility for justice. So imagine waiting for a bus that never comes, standing in 95-degree heat beside a freeway that splits your neighborhood from 2 generations ago. Imagine not even having a bus stop, but just a pole. That's where mobility for justice begins, with the understanding that transportation is not just logistics, it's climate, it's health, and it's human dignity. Next slide, please. Mobility for Justice is a 5-episode podcast series that shows how transportation equity is inseparable from climate and environmental justice. Next slide, please. Through conversations with residents, advocates, and researchers, the series uncovers the systemic root of transportation equity and the community power shaping solutions. Collectively, these stories present a common reality that movement is only one part of mobility. Mobility is about access to jobs, safety, healthcare, and connections. It's about who can get where they need to go and who gets left behind. And by reframing mobility as a human right and elevating frontline experience, my hope is that this podcast invites policymakers, planners, and residents alike to imagine a city where every neighborhood can move, breathe, and thrive without leaving anyone behind. So the purpose of this is not just to explore how we travel, but it's to challenge us to rethink what freedom of movement truly means. Now let's listen to the heartbeat of that idea. Next slide, please. And you should be able to click on the screen right there, the video. Every highway and sidewalk has a story. Connection for some, destruction for others. In Houston, mobility tells us who's heard and who's left waiting. This is Mobility for Justice, a podcast about highways, bus routes, and the people reimagining their neighborhoods. We center resident voices to tell stories of resilience, coalition building, and safe streets that move us closer toward climate and environmental justice.
I am not allowed to have a driver's license. I often tell people that I can drive, but you don't want me to. So that means that I have to think about where I live, where I work, how I want to move in my community, and what transportation options are available to me.
This season, you'll hear from Gabe Cáceres, Jason Oliver, Andy Escobar, Tommy Nguyen, and Huey German Wilson about disability advocacy, reimagining community assets, being a community leader, and climate and environmental justice. This is Mobility for Justice.
Are you ready, Cherrelle?
Yes, so sorry. So although you all weren't able to see the presentation, the video, this is essentially the pulse of Mobility for Justice, real people stories layered with sound, data, and history. Each episode follows a deliberate arc that traces how mobility connects to justice at every level. Highways and Histories is about policy, displacement, and design. Breathing on a Bus is about heat, air, and public health. Voices in Climate Emergencies is about coalitions and advocacy. Youth on the Move is about civic engagement and sustainability. And Reimagining the Block is the final episode that is about equitable redevelopment and resilience. The goal is truly to balance narration and resident voice, ensuring that me as the host, that I really don't overpower the guests. So it's meant to be a hybrid narrative discussion where I will open each episode to frame policy, and then the residents and the experts will carry the story. Next slide, please. So while this concept may seem to lean heavily on qualitative voices, it's complemented by quantitative data that will be included in show notes as well as in the discussions. And this approach will bridge story and science, where sources will include the Kenner Institute Heat Island data, which shows the overlap between historically redlined neighborhoods and areas with the highest surface temperatures, using the unofficial EPA EJ screen data, which will connect proximity to elevated asthma rates in Houston's Fifth Ward and near Northside neighborhoods. Using our metro performance metrics will allow us to contrast route frequency and on-time rates based on low and high income neighborhoods. And the news articles will keep this podcast fresh and relevant, especially from the Houston Chronicle, which will link recent transportation, climate, and environmental issues to community. So these additions are added to ensure that the series is grounded in both narrative truth and statistical evidence. So you've heard the voice of Gabe Cáceres, who was on the trailer earlier. So let's now hear a small clip from Andy Escobar with the Coalition of Equity, Environment, and Resilience, or CEEJH, who describes how their network bridges environmental, social, and climate justice advocacy. Next slide. And you'll just click on the bottom box, yes.
Which it feels like, oh my gosh, like I have to worry about my air quality and my water quality. And, I live by this concrete batch plant or by a landfill, right? Like there's just all these multipliers. And so I think a lot of people want to be able to understand a role that they can play, or something that they can do to, make this world a better place. And I think that's something that SEER provides, right? We're not only just a coalition of nonprofit organizations, but we also have a community, right? We have a base. There's people both in our regional work from all across the greater Houston area or the Texas Gulf Coast, but then we also have a really strong base in Northeast Houston, right, in Fifth Ward, in Lakewood, Kashmere Gardens, and that is also a really rich part of our work, that people feel seen and welcomed and at home in SEER. And so I think that's what's really important about the work that we do. It's centering people, it's centering community, it's understanding that people power is how we can make change. And we have to be strategic and intentional and meet people where they're at and give them permission and, a vision for how they can be part of this work. Because I also think that climate and environmental justice work is, I say this a lot, but it is a light in some of the darkness that we're facing. It feels good to be outside. It feels good to get your hands dirty. It feels good to be with your neighbors and to connect with the natural world. And so that's what I think is really critical.
I appreciate you sharing that. Reflecting on your statement that some of these things that we cannot control, you're right. There are lots of things that we can't control, but in the transportation world, we like to always encourage individuals to know that one of the things that you can be mindful of and try to support is your contribution um to greenhouse gas emissions, right? And we know that transportation is a major contributor to the carbon footprint. And so we, like you, encourage individuals to get outside, walk, bike, take public transportation, as some of those things are the most carbon efficient options that there are there. And if you must be in a vehicle, carpooling significantly can reduce emissions, right, compared to just driving alone. So I think it's really just like a culture shift, a mind shift, and understanding that like you only get so much earth, the water, trying to figure out how are you. Thank you. So this is episode 3, which is Voice in Climate Emergencies. And as you heard, we explore how communities, the beginning of the episode is how communities mobilize around disasters from flooding, heat waves, and infrastructure failures that cut off entire neighborhoods. But really, there was a turning point in the season in this discussion where we talk about how policy meets people and how community resilience is redefined. And so the lived experience that bridge people and the systemic struggles that we may face is really the point of mobility for justice. Other experts that could be featured would include from CEEJH, its own Sonia of Climate Communication Coalition, Mariah Barber, and even from Houston, Dr. Robert Bullard, the father of environmental justice, Jared Walker, the former Metro planner who's credited for the 2015 system reimagining, and then Jen Hadaya, the executive director of Air Alliance Houston, which focuses on air quality, public health, and environmental racism. And that those things can really just be a thread line between all of the episodes. And so this moment that you heard really captures, again, the heartbeat of what this podcast is meant to be. And as Andy reminds us, climate, it's important for us to have people involved in the work and storytell and build coalitions because we are stronger together. Next slide, please. So to sustain and scale this project, there's really just a couple of tools. I think it's the easiest thing now to do is be a part of a podcast. Really the tools that you will need for recording includes Zoom or Otter. In this case, I use my iPhone recording feature. And to share out, you can have it on Apple Podcasts, or any other platforms like that. Partnerships would include continued collaboration with Link Houston or even Houston in Action, which is a large coalition of different nonprofit organizations focused on several different important matters around justice. And then just general, as I mentioned, Air Alliance, Bike Houston, different organizations that are local to the market that this podcast would be focused on. And for the target audience, all of these audiences mentioned Houston residents, policymakers and planners, and then youth and students, as well as community activists, bus riders, and then Metro. One of the ones I wanted to share most, though, is about youth and student activists. I believe that through sharing stories and hearing from them, we will be able to mobilize the next generation of leaders, which is the impact that I'm looking for. And so in addition to that, other impacts would include just having 10 podcast listeners at least sign up and take civic action, whether that's speaking at a public hearing or a city council meeting or a metro meeting within 12 months of the podcast launch, securing meetings with metro board members or city council members to discuss some of the things that community members have said and findings that we heard, and then achieving each at least 3 references to the podcast, whether it's through news or other podcasts or public comments that people make. And then finally, having continuous and conducting listener surveys to ensure that they are understanding what these challenges are, but in the links between transportation, environmental justice, before and after listening. And so the timeline for this would just be 6 months in total, 2 for research, 3 for recording, and 1 for editing and final outreach. And it is my hope to sustain this podcast. I have been fortunate to share it with a few individuals, and there are already 4 recordings of this. All of the ones, there are 4 15-minute podcast recordings already, and then an hour long, just strictly about Northeast Houston. And people are excited to really hear more about this and to continue along and have different conversations with some of the people that I mentioned before, and even others that I cannot even imagine yet. But people are excited about the thought. And so really the final call to action here is just for just a reminder that every shared story through mobility and justice is a reminder that system change begins with voice. And so this is to put voice to people and to policy and to hopefully make the purpose of this meaningful. And the future of Houston's mobility really depends on who's invited to shape it. And it includes everyone who has been featured on the podcast so far and who will continue to be featured in the future. And so I would call on policymakers, planners, and advocates to do more than just listen, but to act. And then also I would call on educators or partners at CEEJH to take this action further and integrate some of the things that will be shared on this podcast into different classrooms or settings or civic learning spaces, just to help people see that there are mobility issues in transportation, climate, and environmental justice everywhere, but that it's all about power, opportunity, and belonging. Because teaching mobility is teaching about justice, and because mobility for justice will be built to move people, not just physically, but civically. And again, together, we can design a city where every neighborhood can move, breathe, and thrive without anyone being left behind. So mobility is just a pulse of justice. And when we move together, the city will hopefully follow. Thank you. And just as a final note, I included my Google Drive so you can review all of my all of the videos, because there are some pretty there are some videos that I would love for you all to review at your time. So thank you so much.
Provide them with a tool that can be worn on a daily basis. Thank you very much, Cherrelle. Great job. I do have a few questions for each of you. I know that we had a Vanessa. So first of all, before I ask questions, does anyone have any questions for Cherrelle, Sabrina, or Tarshire? All right, that's it. So let me jump right in with some questions that I have. My first question is for Sabrina. So Sabrina, I wanted to chat a little bit about the references that you shared for governance failure. And you mentioned, so like what specific research data or case studies can you point to that document the scale of disproportionate impacts of environmental injustices in the focus area that you mentioned?
Yeah, so in my local area, it's called Northamptonshire. Northamptonshire Council has, for the last just over a decade, had multiple failures. So if you go onto the local government website, you can see that it actually had to be, it went bankrupt in 2018 because of poor financial management. So council leaders had been on team building trips to Europe and stuff like that, but none of the actual bills were getting paid for the residents. So the government had to, like the national government had to step in and take over and redistribute. There was loads and loads of failures of services for local people. So it's all quite well documented. A recent audit in 2022 has identified that some of those problems actually haven't been resolved and they've just been negated through some very clever accountancy. So the problems are still, happening. We just got taken over by another party where we had local elections, and we've had multiple failures since they took over because they literally are not turning up to events. So it's not that there's a specific place to go and find this data. This data is all available on the government website because it has to be tracked as part of the structure of local governance. I think part of the failure that we're seeing is actually that that data is not being updated regularly. So the most current data is actually from 2022. That was the last audit. So then all we've got is the fact that there's no meeting notes because no one's turning up to meetings. So people from the population are turning up, but leaders aren't turning up to those council meetings, so decisions can't be made and budgets can't be signed. So we only know from the absence of things happening rather than from data, if that makes sense. Like we know that the local bin collections weren't happening, for example, because that contract wasn't signed.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. I have a question for you to share, and it's about risk and conflict mitigation. So your proposal, it definitely identified land grabbing as a threat. And given the economic interests involved in the land use in Indonesia, what are some specific strategies that you thought about for mitigating backlash or political pressures from industry like palm oil or logging, and how will you support communities if these legal conflicts arise?
Right. I think with any, like when you, especially in other countries outside of the United States, you have to do an assessment of what the government looks like because every government structure is different. And I had mentioned Sri Lanka as an example. Like when I was there, just give an example of the government structure. We were supposed to do a demonstration around what's happening in another country in terms of the war in Palestine, and was put on hold because we couldn't participate as outsiders. But I guess empowering the residents to at least have an input or a say in terms of the direction, realizing that every action, I guess every kind of action that we take as environmentalists or land stewards, we're going to encounter government pushback. And what does that look like? And how do we still empower people not to be afraid to take a step? But also, I guess, like learning what the government structure is too would be important to know. Like I said, each country is different. I hope that makes sense. I don't
No,
like
no,
I'm not
no,
right.
it does make sense, but I was wondering if you could point to like specifics in the country that you were talking about, specifically Indonesia.
Yeah.
So if you had any examples of how you guys may have already dealt with some conflicts that you have there.
Yeah, well, since I haven't worked there, this is just something I chose.
Ah, okay, gotcha.
Yeah, yeah.
Gotcha.
It was
No,
one
no,
of
thanks for clarifying.
yep,
Yep.
yep. But I would say that's why I said to like know what that government structure is. What are the like what's the dynamics? Because not every country, is democratic, put it that way. And
Yeah.
so I don't want to put also like not going in and putting people in harm's way to do a demonstration, but I realize the importance of it. And so I guess that's what a community conversations would be helpful with the residents because they know their environment, they know their government. And so they'll be able to kind of guide that process in terms of what can be done in terms of like if there needs to be some kind of conflict and how that would look, how that
Mhm.
will look in terms of like advocacy for land.
Mhm.
And that's what storytelling is like, that's pretty much storytelling, I think, is like it's not a hard push. It's very personal. And it shares a story without being confrontational. So that's why I put storytelling in there.
Yeah, thank you so much. And then Cherrelle, question for you. So, I think you did a really great job at centering the qualitative and lived experience. So, if I pushed you further to persuade like data-driven policymakers, did you consider integrating any specific quantitative data sets, like heat maps of bus stops, health disparities statistics, or even the Metro's own metrics inside any of the episodes or notes?
Yeah,
And if so, how did it help shape the conversations that you had?
Yeah, I really appreciate you sharing your feedback about that. And it definitely encouraged me to ensure that those things are not only in the shared notes, but to really structure the podcast a little bit differently, right? To ensure that we are hearing not only from people's lived experience, but we're also centering here's what the data says and here's what we can do about it or what has been done about it in the past. So as I mentioned, the Kinder using their mapping around heat islands, even recent articles around how depending on where you live in the city of Houston, your heat can be your outside can be 10 degrees hotter than other areas, right? And having conversations about what that looks like in terms of waiting for a bus or waiting for whatever you may need to be waiting for to be able to use public transportation. All of those things can definitely be integrated. And also, as I mentioned, just being really focused on ensuring that we're using the sources that we are critiquing as Life Metro, if we will be critiquing them, ensuring that we're using their data sets to show what service changes are and why they are existing, right? Or including why certain communities, our communities of color, have a lower bus frequency. And so using all of that data to really center the conversation is kind of how we would be moving forward with this podcast.
Thank you so much. I did have two questions for each of you, but I know that we've run over just a little bit. So I'm going to end there with my questions. But I did want to ask each of you in the evaluations that I sent you, if you've had a chance to review any of those, would you like to address any of the areas for further development that I mentioned that you wanted to bring up instead of me asking targeted questions?
Yeah, I found the feedback really helpful and quite insightful. I was aware that there was maybe some gaps around the research that I used to build, because this project was being built before I got to the end of this program. So we were already developing this project before I started the fellows program,
Mm-hmm.
because this is the work that we generally do. So I feel like maybe in the limitations of the 6-page assignment, I didn't get to really express how we got to this point, because it's like been a 3-year project that we've been building. I've been part of the research program that Aston University did and part of the research for NatWest that they did around entrepreneurship. So culminating all of that research together, I probably didn't give you great context of the backstory. But I understand that I probably should have pitched that better, because in my brain it's been such a long time that it's not current for me. But to give you an understanding of how we got here, that would have been helpful. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's probably the big lesson for me to take away, is mapping that out for people who haven't been on the journey with us.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, I think for me, it would be what we actually spoke about just now, just ensuring that there is a balance between primary and secondary sources, right? And ensuring that it's not just community voice, but that it's data backed and proven what we're saying. Just because we in Houston live in a particular climate, other places too, but in Houston, we're in a climate where some of our leadership, they're not really listening to anything. And so we can use this as a tool to be able to, as an advocacy metric, our method to be able to share stories, but also back with data. And so just making sure that I include that so that when we publish this, that there's little deniability about not just what people are saying and experiencing, but where the information is coming from as well. So that was the biggest thing I took.
Thank you so much.
And I would say it's similar. And I mean, that was in one of the slides, both qualitative and quantitative data. So
Yeah.
a balance, because you can't, just have just stories without having also those hard figures that kind of show how impactful, what's going on environmentally and why it's needed, and why it's so and how it's impacting people. But yeah, definitely a balance of both kind of data is needed when you're presenting information in this
Thank you all
context.
so much. Appreciate it. I see Vanessa is still here sticking it out with us. Thank you so much, Vanessa. Vanessa, Miriam, did you guys have any questions before we end the session today?
No questions, just compliments. Great job, everybody.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much. You have added a lot to my information.
All right. And with that, I'm going to say thank you, each of you again. And Cherrelle, remember, take a beat. We've all been there. We have our days. So just take a deep breath, recenter yourself, and get back to it. But you did great. You all did great.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.